Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025, and our friend Graham Fuller is back with us. Welcome back, Graham.
Thank you, Nima. My pleasure.
Graham, when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, it seems that what's going on in Syria is getting much more complicated. We've learned that Israelis are not going to leave the southern part of Syria and they're going to stay forever if at least they're talking about this right now. And on the other hand, Turkey has its own policy. They're trying to say that we're not going to capture any part of Syria. Nobody's allowed to do this. We know that they're talking about Israelis. Do you think that the game is changing in Syria? Is the nature of the conflict in the Middle East changing under the situation of Syria?
Well, that's a complicated question. As you know, Syria is right in the middle of so many of these tensions: Turkish, Israeli, Iraqi, Islamic, Lebanese, even Saudi influences. But anyway, um, I think the most important thing to understand about Turkey is that it has been evolving dramatically in its perception of the world over the last 25, 30 years. Um, I think everyone remembers, some people remember back in the day that Turkey was viewed as America's staunch ally and friend in the Middle East, reliable ally. Um, and that was the case for a long, long time. And then suddenly Turkey, I think, began to rethink its geopolitical place in the world, partly because of Islamic influence, but also, I think, the return of history, if you will, to Turkey. I mean, after all, we know Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, as it was known for hundreds and hundreds of years, was the center of Islam and Islamic culture and society for that period. So it's impossible for Turkey to forget its Islamic heritage. Actually, the leader Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, whom many people have heard about, who was determined to modernize Turkey and was a brilliant modernizer in so many respects, but he also felt that the Islamic factor was holding Turkey back, if you will, from becoming more Western. He saw Westernization as the future of the world. I think Turkey rediscovered some 25, 30 years ago with Erdogan and with his brilliant foreign minister at the time, Davutoglu, that Turkey's actually its grand tradition is being the center of the Muslim world. And it has now moved more and more in that direction to be concerned about Islamic issues and to support them. I mean, if we look around today, for example, on the Palestinian question, it's fascinating that the only two Muslim countries in the world that are seriously supporting the Palestinian cause in public are Turkey and Iran. Yes, also the Houthis in Yemen, but they're a very small group. So anyway, already you can see Turkey here is beginning to play a very major role in speaking about the Palestinian problem. And they are getting more and more involved, I think, as time goes along and seeing itself more and more as not only a Western country, if you will, or a European country, but also a Middle East country and a Mediterranean country. And it's going to play in Middle East politics very seriously. And I would argue more and more and more as it goes back to its historic roots and not stays as the old friendly good guy American friend of Turkey in NATO.
And with the rise of HTS or these people in the government in Syria, do you think that Turkey would consider very a bigger role for itself in the near future in that region, or they're gonna stay with their sort of policies that we've been witnessing so far?
I suspect that Turkey will become more active and more involved in these affairs with time. But that, of course, partly depends very much on who is running the country. And we know that Erdogan very much shares these views of Turkey's Islamic heritage and Turkey, indeed, one might say, Islamic responsibility to speak on issues that concern the Muslim world. I mean, under Erdogan and his quite brilliant foreign minister, as I mentioned, Davutoglu, Turkey began to talk about itself not only as European but as Middle Eastern and Central Asian and Caucasian and even African, North African power. It became more. It still is involved quite a bit in the Horn of the Horn of Africa. So it's got a very expansive view. I don't want to say moving its borders, no, but it's an expanding view of its responsibilities and involvement in the Muslim world more broadly. So I don't know. It depends on how Syria plays the game, how HTS plays the game. Are they going to be hostile to Turkey? Or will they decide that cooperation is better? And it's too early to tell, but I think Israel will probably drive Syria more and more into the arms of Turkey and Iran possibly as well.
And you've mentioned Erdogan and his party and his ilk. The alternative in Turkey, what do we know about that? And how do they see the region?
Well, it's hard to talk about an alternative in Turkey because Erdogan has been in power now for such a very long time and has really put his stamp, psychological, political, geopolitical stamp on what Turkey is today and how Turkey thinks about itself. If there is, well, of course, there would be opposition parties, but essentially, I don't see opposition parties really having any creative vision. All they could say was, well, we should be closer to the West or we shouldn't alienate NATO too much. But I don't see much really creative thinking coming out of Turkey from opposition parties at this point. But people are tired of Erdogan also after a long time. So, excuse me. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, I think we will see very importantly how Turkey is going to operate vis-a-vis Europe. I don't, it's not very clear right now, but I think it's many NATO members are saying that Turkey is simply not a real NATO member anymore. And some want to throw Turkey out of NATO. But as I've said before, I think NATO needs Turkey symbolically more than Turkey needs NATO.
And how is that work in the mind of Donald Trump? Does he see Turkey as an ally? Does he see Turkey as a West Asian country that they have to get along with?
It's almost impossible to understand how Trump thinks. But in the end, I think he tends to be a realist rather than an ideologist. I think he's willing to deal with countries that maybe are perceived as prickly or difficult. I mean, all we have to do is look at Trump's amazing meetings with Kim Jong-un in Korea, North Korea, astonishing, which horrified the entire American foreign policy establishment. You don't talk to people like that if you're a powerful American state. So I think Trump may not like what Turkey's politics are, but he's transactional. And I think he may feel that it's too important to ignore and very dangerous to make an enemy of. It makes very little sense. But I would not want to go too far in predicting where Trump will go on some of this.
At least we've heard from Tulsi Gabbard that she's going to be the head of total intelligence of the United States. Here is what she said, and I want to know what's your take on the way that she's talking about Turkey.
is not our friend. He's one of the most dangerous dictators in the world, and the United States government and media have no business helping this Islamist megalomaniac and his Al Qaeda partners. Turkey's been supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda terrorists from behind the scenes for years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you played me that clip because I have tended to admire Tulsi Gabbard until you played that clip for me. I still think that she is a very intelligent, very knowledgeable uh, woman who thinks deeply about foreign policy issues. Look, she's having to talk to Congress, and I think she's got to be very careful right now if she wants to be accepted to say the things that the Congress wants to hear. Needless to say, I profoundly disagree with her. If Turkey is absolutely going to deal with Islamist forces in the world. When I say Islamist, I don't mean terrorists or radicals. I simply mean those states that see a place for Islam in the nature of governance in the Muslim world. So I'm sorry to hear Tulsi say that. I think she's smart enough to change her mind when she comes to power, but who am I to tell her that?
Yeah, but after all, it's important what they're talking about because we know that Iran, as you mentioned, we have two important countries in the Middle East, Iran and Turkey. And Iran, so far for more than 40 years, is the enemy of the United States in terms of because of Israel, because of what's going on in the Middle East. And here is Turkey, the second country. Is the United States, the United States afford losing Turkey in the West Asia?
No, it cannot, which is why I said earlier I thought that NATO needs Turkey more than Turkey needs NATO. Even if symbolically it's very important that the Middle East is included within NATO, in NATO thinking. But I would have to say I think Tulsi Gabbard is correct that Turkey is no longer America's best friend in the Middle East that it used to talk about for decades and decades and prided itself on being America's best. Those days are absolutely gone. Turkey is Turkey's own best friend, and Turkey will do what it feels it should do as representing a long time powerful Islamic country in the world under the Ottoman Empire and now coming back into Middle East politics. So I don't think I'm sorry, Washington will not find Turkey to be a comfortable partner. Turkey is simply too independent minded. But I don't think U.S. can afford to expel Turkey from either NATO or even from diplomatic close diplomatic relations if possible.
How, Graham, how do you see the relationship between Iran and Turkey? Are they competing with each other? Are they the enemies of each other? How is that understandable what's going on between the two countries? Because the two, as you mentioned, are so important. And here comes the relationship, which is so important to understand the position of any of these two countries. How do you find it? How do you see the way that they're treating each other?
Well, as you know, Turkey and Iran have had a great deal to do with each other for hundreds and hundreds of years, have been rivals in many senses for a very long time. But I would say right now in this contemporary world that they are kind of friendly rivals, perhaps, if you will, or prickly friends, perhaps is another way to say it. But I think Turkey and Iran tend to view the world at this point very much from a let's say a third world perspective, a developing world perspective. I think both of them are natural partners for membership in BRICS organization. So I would, and I think the pressure that that Israeli expansionism, we might even call it imperialism, neo-imperialism, if you will, the pressure that this creates with its expansionism, I think, is bringing Turkey and Iran ever closer together. Um, the only thing issues between Turkey and Iran really is issues of who will have the greater influence in the region, but that's quite manageable as far as I can see. If Turkey, if a new government comes in Turkey, as it will eventually through elections, there will probably be some slight change, maybe a greater caution on the part of Turkey vis-a-vis the West, but I would not expect major change. And similarly in Iran, if the Ayatollahs are overthrown or fall or collapse or whatever, I doubt that Iran will suddenly stop being an important voice for other issues in the Middle East. Um, it's these are deeply ingrained mentalities and psychologies in Turkish and Iranian thinking.
Because before Iranian revolution taking place in Iran, we know that the government under Shah was talking the way that they were supporting Palestinians in their cause in those
Yes,
days.
which is very interesting because otherwise the Shah of Iran supported almost anything and everything that the U.S. liked in the region. I'm exaggerating slightly, but not much. I mean, the Shah was America's best friend in the Middle East and indispensable ally until he no longer was indispensable. He fell from power. But so I think the fact that even the Shah of Iran was sympathetic to Iran, I mean to
Palestinians.
Palestinians, suggests that there are deeper roots even within Iranian thinking about broader issues and causes in the region. Today, if you talk about imperialism and Western imperialism and dominance in the Middle East, you have to look at Israel first and foremost, perhaps even more than Washington. Washington is putting a great deal of political pressure for sure, but Israel is actually seizing territory, and nobody knows even what the full expanse of that territory is. God knows because it's in the Bible, but otherwise nobody else knows what those borders are. And I suspect that this is making the Middle East extremely nervous. And frankly, to my way of thinking, this may even be hastening the ultimate collapse of Israel itself over the much longer term. I'm not predicting that Israel is on the verge of collapse at all, but I think it is running so contrary to the entire thinking of the region and even to most of the thinking in the third world or the global south or the BRICS or whatever. Israel is extraordinarily isolated apart from America and a Europe that does not dare talk about Israel ever in critical terms as a result of World War II.
We have the issue in southern Lebanon that after ceasefire, that which was the government in Lebanon, which is so close to at least to the French government and with the United States, they're totally cooperating with the United States to bring some sort of sanity to the region. But after all, Hezbollah went along with their plan of ceasefire. It doesn't seem that Israel is satisfied with that ceasefire. They're not leaving the southern part of Lebanon. People are getting back to their homes, and Israelis are there. They're not leaving. Do you understand what's going on in the mind of Israelis?
I think Israel is playing this game one step at a time. Um, no one really could absolutely foresee the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Um, the United States had been trying to overthrow the Assad family, both Bashar's father and Bashar himself, for decades, unsuccessfully. So I think I doubt that there's really going to be much long range change in the way Syria thinks about the world. Again, we have to remember Syria was the capital of the Umayyad Islamic dynasty, one of the most important of two major Islamic dynasties in history. It sees itself very much at the center of Middle Eastern culture, power, influence. Yes, it's very weak and in a terrible state of affairs right now, but Syria still considers itself in many ways important concept, an intellectual Islamic concept. I don't see that changing at all. Whether it's going to be heavily Islamic or more Arab nationalist, I don't know. But we cannot expect Syria to really change its color as far as I can see in any future scenario.
And the government in Lebanon, Graham, the government in Lebanon tries to manage the situation between the east, between the Hezbollah and the United States or Israel. Let's put it that way. But so far, the way that they're treating the government in Lebanon, is that going to put the government in a better place? Or they're gonna weaken more this government which tries to communicate with Hezbollah? Hezbollah said that they're gonna get along with the plan on the part of government with the ceasefire. But when Israel behaves this way, how is that going to influence the internal policies in Lebanon?
You know, Nima, I don't know that Lebanon has a great deal of options in front of it. It's a small country. It's a weak country. It's been invaded endlessly. It's ethnically divided. I mean, Lebanese over centuries have learned how to live with each other, but nonetheless, they're ethnically and religiously, culturally divided. So I'm afraid Lebanon is not really in a position to influence much of the uh, force of events surrounding it. That's too bad because it's a wonderful and culturally rich country. But so, as I say, I tend to think that the pressures that Israel is increasing unceasingly, unbelievably, moving and moving and advancing and advancing. I find it very hard to believe that Syria is going to have much choice other than to join the ranks of resistance in some way. Whatever kind of government it has, if it's Ba'athist or Islamist or whatever, no Syrian government, which is the heart and the seat in many ways of Arab nationalism, the origins of Arab nationalism, if you will, going back a long way. It's very hard for me to imagine acceptance of the situation. And I fear that Lebanon will be broken as usual by these conflicting forces from outside and even inside the country. It's sad, but it's the reality.
Graham, how much of leverage does Iran have on these groups and in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and Hamas as well? Because in the West, they're talking about these are Iranian proxies. How much of the proxies these groups are for Iran, and what do they do to benefit Iran, and what's the benefit for Iran for helping these people?
Well, you know, the word proxy is deliberately an insulting word. It suggests that you have no agency, that you're simply carrying out the wishes of others. I mean, if I wanted to be unpleasant about it, I might describe Europe as an American proxy. in all kinds of issues around the world. We don't like that word, and so we call them allies. But in any case, certainly in Yemen, where you have where you have a minority, Houthis, Shiite minority, they have to look to outside states to assist them in some way, to at least lend them some kind of diplomatic support. As we know, the Shia are the dominant uh, majority within Iraq, not the Sunnis, but the Shia. And that's one of the reasons why Iraqi politics have been so troubled for such a very long time, was that the minority Sunnis had been dominating and oppressing the majority Shia for a long time. And I believe that the Shia in Lebanon are the single biggest group of all, but I'm not 100% sure whether I remember those facts correctly. But so, in other words, the Shia are a very important group and have their own interests, will naturally have probably good relations with other Shiite states, especially Iran. But it doesn't mean that they do everything that Iran wants. And the greater the pressure that's placed on these Shia minorities or even majorities, the greater the pressure put upon them, the greater their tendency to look outside for support, military support, economic support, geopolitical support, or whatever. But if these regimes were in the Middle East were better run, more democratic, then perhaps the need for Shia inside their boundaries would be less in search of outside support. And also, by the way, let's not forget that that Hamas is not Shiite; it's Sunni, and it's Islamist Sunni organization. And Iran has always loved Hamas, and Hamas has always enjoyed good relations with Iran. So it isn't all just about even being a minority or being religious or ethnic or other kinds of minorities.
The reason I ask this question is that the vice president of Iran, Javad Zarif, in the World Economic Forum, he had a talk with Farid Zakaria of CNN, in which he said that we help these people because we have never cashed this sort of help that we are giving to these people. Iran so far didn't need any sort of help coming from these countries. We are helping them because we believe that Palestinian must be free after all. And when it comes to the problem between Iran and the United States, we know that the main problem is the issue with Palestine. And just putting that aside, there is no difference between the United States and Iran in the region. I would say they can work with each other in the region. And how do you see, and what Zarif said is that the resistance exists because of the occupation, and the resistance existed before the Iranian revolution coming into power in Iran. That's why by dealing with Iran, by even go after some sort of negotiations on the JCPOA and the new nuclear deal, that doesn't change the situation of Palestine between Israel and Palestine. That issue is an isolated issue that has to be dealt with considering Palestinians. How much of the reality is reflected in these sort of arguments on his part?
I tend to think they're fairly accurate. I mean, it's clear that the United States, in many ways, has always been interested in trying to, as the Arabs say, cancel the Palestinian issue, to ignore it, to consider it as unimportant or whatever. But I don't see that the situation, as you correctly say, Nima, I don't see this any improvement of the situation between the United States and Iran as long as the Palestine issue continues. Furthermore, I should point out that I think the Palestinian issue, correctly or incorrectly, fairly or unfairly, is now seen, I think, by much of the developing world, the third world, the global south, BRICS, or whatever you want to call it. I think it is viewed as one of the preeminent issues of colonialism, the remnants of colonialism in the Arab world, since the British Empire was mainly responsible for the creation of Israel. It doesn't mean that the Jews of the world did not feel that it was an important issue for them, but it was more important to Britain as an instrument to manipulate the Middle East than it was a concern for necessarily for Jewish refugees. So I'm I'm afraid that most of the world is increasingly less sympathetic to Israeli arguments about threats to Israeli existence and are increasingly concerned about the, we might call, neo-colonial treatment of Palestinians, and especially in the Middle East, where it's a very volatile region. I think many of the rulers of the Gulf in particular would like to cancel, to use that word, would like to cancel the Palestinian issue as well, because it's very awkward for them. I mean, these rulers hate mass movements, demonstrations, talk about grievances and rights. That makes them very uncomfortable. It threatens the solidity of their regimes. So it isn't just the Palestinians, but it's because of the power, the emotional power of the Palestinian issue within the Middle East that makes the Saudis, UAE, and others very nervous when it comes to possibly generating mass movements in the street. They just don't want that. And for that perspective, they would like to cancel, if you will, the issue. Interestingly, Qatar is the only, or Qatar, as people say in the West, is the only state that seems quite openly willing to support the Palestinian issue. Otherwise, it's very dangerous for the Saudis. They're scared of this issue. They want to get rid of it, but they can't.
And we know that the main goal, and since the conflict in between Israel and Palestine started, was to pushing the people into the southern part of Gaza, and then maybe forcing them to go to Egypt or maybe Jordan. I don't know. This was the main goal on the part of Israelis, which has failed so far. And Antony Blinken tried to help them politically, force Egypt and Jordan to help, but he wasn't successful in that to achieve that. Here comes Donald Trump. He comes before January 20th. He forced Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. Right after, the day after his inauguration, he said that this is not our war, this is their war. But Gaza can be a beautiful place. We can rebuild Gaza. I don't know, he was talking about settlers, all of that. But do you, and yesterday he said that he's trying to force Egypt and Jordan to accept Palestinians, to accept these people as immigrants. I don't know, whatever is in his mind, but it's the same sort of policy that the Biden administration has failed to help Israelis with that. And here comes Donald Trump. Do you think that he's going to be much more influential on Jordan and Egypt to achieve that?
Very good question. Trump's favorite tool now in foreign policy instrument seems to be sanctions. Biden liked sanctions a lot too, but Biden also loved war and perpetuated two terrible wars in Ukraine and Gaza. So I'm not sure. I think Egypt violently rejects any acceptance of Palestinians, not on humanitarian grounds so much, but they refuse to be the instrument. Excuse me. They refuse to be the instrument for cancellation of Palestine, of the Palestinian issue. That would be a very ugly legacy for future Egyptian leaders to say, well, we helped facilitate the Israeli takeover of Palestine by accepting all their refugees. And similarly, Jordan, as you know, Jordan is already a majority Palestinian state. And I think if you are forced more and more more and more Palestinians into Jordan, the state will simply explode. It doesn't have the money, it doesn't have the resources. It's, as I say, already a majority Palestinian state. The non-Palestinian members of Jordan are very fearful that the state would then be taken over by entirely by a Palestinian government and rule. I don't think King Hussein would survive very long such a situation as that. So this is very explosive. You can't simply move people and take them out of their homelands. I mean, the word Philistine is in the Bible. So this is not some invented modern state. This goes back thousands of years. So I think it's very, very dangerous for any state, especially Arab state, Muslim state, to simply casually talk about how we can reward Israeli aggression and help cancel the Palestinian cause. It's just very, very, very dangerous. And furthermore, these Gulf rulers know that. I think that's why maybe Qatar is willing to is smart enough to acknowledge the legitimacy of this cause and to be far more supportive of it, both diplomatically and economically, to try to reach some solution.
And the other objective that the Netanyahu administration was so vocal about it during the conflict between Israel and Gaza was that we're gonna destroy Hamas and before leaving Gaza. Right now there is a ceasefire and the hostages, they're just exchanging their hostages. But when you see the pictures coming out of Gaza and you see the brigade, Al Qassam brigade, and those forces with the arms those arms are not Iranian nor Russians, are Israeli arms in the hand of these people. Lot of forces coming. I don't know where they come from, and all of a sudden you see a lot of forces coming and managing everything, helping people, and people are clapping for them and releasing the hostages. Do you see that in the mind of Israelis, seeing what's happening right now in Gaza, is that still a viable choice to destroy Hamas?
I doubt that very many Israelis at all are seriously thinking about how wise it was to engage in the struggle against Hamas. As far as as far as I can understand, excuse me, from a distance, it seems that most of the Israeli population is wildly satisfied with Netanyahu, with the entire war. Yes, there's some complaints about the hostages not coming out fast enough and maybe some Israeli deaths. But overall, I think my sense is from afar is that the Israeli population is very, very supportive of all of this. So I don't think some demonstrations by Hamas or others carrying weapons is going to change that view. If anything, it will just convince Israelis that they need to support for more pressure to get rid of all Palestinians, because we all know the Palestinians are all terrorists, quote unquote. So they will want to, that will strengthen the cause of removing them from Palestine. I don't see any serious thinking at all in Israel, except for the remarkable newspaper that we all know about, Haaretz, which has a very clear vision. I'm amazed that Haaretz is still even in existence, permitted to be in existence in Israel. But I don't see any serious thinking, complex thinking within the Israeli state about its long range future. It's all victorious from their point of view.
By the way, the government in Israel has cut the budget going to Haaretz, that they're not supporting Haaretz in Israel. And the other issue, Graham, Marco Rubio called his counterpart in Egypt. He's trying to picture the same way that Israelis were talking about removing Hamas from Gaza. And he's asking Egypt to help them to do that. Is there any sort of, let's assume they're going to be successful, which is impossible in achieving that. Who's going to be the alternative for them? Mahmoud Abbas? Who's going to believe in Mahmoud Abbas and his Palestinian Authority and whatever it is in the West Bank? How successful were they so far in helping Palestinians?
No, Mahmoud Abbas, I'm afraid, is nothing more than a U.S. proxy, if we use those words, and certainly does Israel's bidding. He has no choice. I mean, if he wants to stay in power and do anything he can to help Palestinians, he has to cooperate with the Israelis almost 100%. So that's out of the picture. I'm not surprised that Egypt would be extremely reluctant to in any way accept Palestinians, much less members of Hamas, who might want to come to to Egypt. Actually, as we know, the Egyptian government has been very hostile and fearful of Islamist movements within Egypt for a very, very long time, and overthrew the legitimately elected Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt after the Arab Spring. So he's yet another Arab dictator who is fearful of the sort of expression of demands for independence and emotional public movements and calls for nationalism and appeals to nationalism and all of that. These rulers hate that. It threatens their very existence. So I'm sure that Sisi in Egypt is equally fearful of any movement like that, and not only from his own security, but I think he would be viewed, I think, with much contempt across the region if he did Israel's bidding in accepting Hamas leaders. And how do you know who is a member of Hamas? You may have some intelligence, but that's not good enough. And furthermore, one very interesting thing talking about Egypt that I've always found important in my thinking, when Gamal Abdel Nasser, who you may recall, who was the Egyptian leader, famous third world leader, anti-colonial leader, and got involved in several wars against Israel, and was really the father of some modern elements of Arab nationalism, if you will. Anyway, somebody said to him, "Why is Egypt doing all these things?" And Nasser said, "Because the Arab nationalist cause and the Palestinian cause is a cause without a leader." And he saw that Egypt could become that leader. He said it was a movement in search of an actor, was the way he put it. And he said, Egypt will be that actor. So this simply suggests that there are forces, sorry, this simply suggests that there are forces geopolitical, psychological, nationalist, economic, whatever you want to, all of these things. There are forces in existence that that cannot be eliminated emotionally. You can maybe kill much of the leadership, you can ban it, you can do one thing or another, but that does not mean that these sentiments will ever go away. And that is one of the powers and of the Palestinian movement, and one of the deep fears of Arab dictators and Israel is that the power, the emotional power of the Palestinian cause is growing, not only in the Arab world as a result of these atrocities in Gaza, but it's spreading throughout much of the whole global South, the BRICS movement. So I have no statistics at all, but I am pretty confident that most of them would have deep intellectual sympathy, emotional sympathy with a movement like Hamas, because they see it as a natural anti-colonial movement, and that's this this is what the modern world is all about right now: is the putting gradually, step by step, an end to the colonial power and rule and influence in the world.
Graham, last time we talked, we were supposed to talk about Greenland, which I forgot to ask about. Yeah. And here is Donald Trump on Greenland, and we know that the officials in Denmark, they're opposing, they're saying that it's impossible for Donald Trump to do that. Do you think that Donald Trump would give up on Greenland and the way that he was talking about that part, that island?
You cannot ask me, Nima, to predict what Donald Trump is going to do or say. Right now, obviously, it's a catchy issue. It's an interesting issue. It gets people's attention. It upsets many people, which is one of Trump's many tactics that he uses, is to throw them off balance, et cetera, maybe simply just to soften them up for later negotiations. And maybe that's what his game is, that, okay, we won't if we can't buy it, and maybe will not grab it militarily, but you will give us all the bases that we want to have there, and you will cooperate with us entirely on geopolitical issues in this area. That may be part of his game. I don't know. As a former, as somebody with a lifelong interest in geopolitics, I find it quite fascinating to look at at this issue of Greenland from, as I say, a geopolitical, even ethnic issue. And my imagination runs wild when I think about it, partly because, as you may know, not many people in Brazil probably know this about Eskimos or Inuit, but the people who live in Greenland they're called, Eskimo is not their own word. They call themselves Inuit. And Inuits are not only in Greenland. There are large numbers, relatively. I mean, several 100,000 Inuit in Canada. There's an entire huge province in northern central Canada called Nunavut, which is a variation on the word Inuit. They're very proud. They have lots of resources. Their own ethnic sense is growing. There's art coming out of these areas from Inuit population, if you will, a growing sense of nationalism. Yes, they're tiny, but nationalism tends to grow. There's no separatism of Inuits, but I would say that the Inuit people of Canada are vividly aware of the broader Inuit population, which even extends over into eastern Alaska. There's an awareness of the unity of these people as one ethnic linguistic group. And I would guess that if somebody wanted to make trouble for Canada, or make trouble for Greenland, or make trouble for Denmark, one of the buttons that I might touch, as thinking about old CIA plots or something, would be to look at the role of the Inuits, maybe in bringing Greenland into Canada itself. They can say we are the center of the Inuit culture, not Greenland, and we should join with Greenland, and Greenland join Canada. Makes much more sense than joining the United States or um, Canada than U.S. buying Greenland. But it's a crazy issue, and I'm just thinking way outside the box to because it comes to mind when you think about ethnic issues and borders and separatism.
When it comes to Donald Trump, I know that you say that he's unpredictable, but from what we've seen from his first term in Washington, do you see that he he's not interested in the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine, or maybe with the conflict in the Middle East, or we're gonna see a leader that gonna continue the same policies of Joe Biden?
I find it impossible almost to think of him continuing the same policies as Joe Biden, given how offensive and what failures they have been um, all the way around. But I have to. I'm sorry, but I have to say I just don't want to predict where Trump is going to go on this. I do not think this is the same Trump as came to power the first time around. It's very interesting that Trump himself has described when he came to power in Washington the first time that he didn't know anybody, he didn't really know the issues, and he had all these people coming up and whispering in his ear saying, "I've got a great candidate for you to be Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State," or all of these things. And Trump, he told this to Joe Rogan. He said, I didn't know about these people." So he said, "This time around, I know the issues and I know the people, and I'm going to," he said, "I appointed a lot of people who were not, frankly, loyal to me, and I told them what I wanted, but they did what they wanted." He said, "This time around, that's not going to happen. They're going to do what I want them to do. I am the boss. I am the president." So I don't think this is exactly the same situation. And I think Trump is maybe in a learning curve. He's got different people around him um, whispering in his ear. But I think he may be even more unpredictable. I I just don't know where he's going to go. He said so much that he can get along with Putin. I think this could be for him the ultimate challenge, even more and more important than getting along with Kim Jong Un in North Korea would be to be able to reach a settlement with Putin that I do not think General Kellogg is going to be able to do, and these offers that may be coming out of the White House so far, I think are just early bargaining positions because Putin is not going to give up his demand that Ukraine simply cannot be part of NATO any more than the United States would accept a Chinese military base on its borders in Mexico. It just can't happen. It's outrageous. So for the United States to consider that, oh, it's perfectly all right to move the borders of NATO, a hostile military organization, to Russia, it's okay to move it right up to the very borders of Russia. These people are not even living in the real world of how states and statesmen think. So I think I just don't think there's much to go on yet to see where Trump is going to come out on this. We're in negotiation stage, perhaps. I hope.
What's so amazing about Donald Trump? I don't know if you remember those days that they were talking about the Russia Gate and all of that. And CIA was reporting, briefing Donald Trump that Russia was interfering in the U.S. election. But in the aftermath of his meeting with Putin, he said that he's gonna believe more. he's gonna believe what Putin said over the CIA report. I would be so surprised, and he's gonna say after meeting with Putin, say, "I think he's right, and Keith Kellogg should change his proposal." That would be so much interesting if he does that.
Yeah, but I think Trump, who is not a deeply informed or very deeply educated person, also has good bargaining instincts and perhaps a good feel for situations. So this is not General Kellogg's plan. These are the first bargaining positions that are going out. And unfortunately, I mean, I feel that even although, as you know, I worked in CIA for 25 years on geopolitical issues, but I think the CIA has, in my distant view, has become far more politicized than it ever was when I was there. And I feel maybe some loss of skills. I don't know. I don't want to be unfair about that. But yeah, it's clear that Trump does not trust the even the motivations or the interpretations or even the loyalty, if you will, of the people he has appointed into intelligence positions, except maybe Tulsi Gabbard. And I don't think she's just going to do anything that Trump wants either. I think she has a good independent mind of her own.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Graham, for being with us today. Great
My
to know
pleasure,
that.
Nima. Always interesting issues. Take care.
See you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.